Hi guys, so in this lesson what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking back over what we've been studying for the last number of weeks, so a bit of revision of the Renaissance. We're also going to be looking at the results of it, so what was the significance of the Renaissance historically, and this is something we're always trying to do, is when we're looking at a piece of history, seeing how it's changed the world, how we can connect it to the way the world is nowadays, to the modern world, and just having those links so we really see the importance of these different events in history and why it's important for us to understand them. So just to start off with, a quick little task. There are pictures of 5 different men from the Renaissance on the screen. I want you to think, can you remember who each of these are? Now we've talked about each of them. I've shown you pictures of each of them before. They're all 5 very, very important people. Okay, so have a think about each of them. Can you remember who each of them is? You might want to pause here and just give your mind a few seconds to kind of think back over it. Okay, you might, don't expect your brain to just automatically get all of this. Okay, pause here, take a few minutes, and look at each of them and think about each of them, and think back through all the different things we've studied as part of the Renaissance, and can you connect the dots to know who each of these men is? Okay, so hopefully you've had a few minutes now, you've paused and had a few minutes to think about this. So for each of them, we'll just go through who each of them are. So on the left, this gentleman on the left here with the hat is Leonardo da Vinci. So he's the most recent person that we've discussed. We talked about him being considered maybe the ideal Renaissance man, being an incredible inventor, a painter, a science, very interested in science and philosophy, and very much someone who made huge contributions. We talked about him possibly being one of the most talented people to have ever lived. Second is Michelangelo, so considered by many to be the greatest artist of the Renaissance time. Okay, the only rival that he may have for that title would be Da Vinci. So Michelangelo being an incredible artist. In the middle here, the third in line is Galileo, and we've discussed how Galileo is very, very important, seen as the father of modern science. Okay, bringing up with the scientific method, very much looking at how to experiment with things, but then also having founded or having come up with a number of laws, such as the law of falling bodies, and considered how these things, how the world around him was working. Fourth in line is Gutenberg. So Gutenberg, the man who invented the printing press, very, very significant in terms of his influence on the world, in terms of how much his invention really changed the world. And last but not least is William Shakespeare, the incredible playwright from England, whom you will all study at some point in your education. Okay, so they are the 5. You may not have gotten all of them, but hopefully you will have gotten a few, and when I've said their names, you will recognize each of those names. Okay, so today what we want to do is think back on the major advances and developments made during the time of the Renaissance. We also then want to consider how the Renaissance affected the world and times that came after it. So we'll start with the thinking back. So what I want you to do is I want you to think back over all these different people that we have discussed. Now, not all of them are pictured there. So some of the others, we have Galileo, we have Michelangelo, we have Copernicus, we have Gutenberg, Da Vinci, Shakespeare, and we have Vesalius. And hopefully in your mind, you'll have an idea of who each of these are. What I want you to do is I want you to select the one person out of all of these whom you consider to be both the most important and the most interesting. Okay, so someone who made a really significant impact. Okay, and that you find personally, okay, they're the more interesting person here. Okay, so now some people may think Galileo was more significant, but might not find him overly interesting. They might be more interested in Shakespeare. That's fine. You choose whoever you wish to choose. And what I want you to do then is I want you to write one paragraph, just 5 to 6 sentences, explaining why this person is both important historically and why they are an interesting person to know about. So I'm just looking for you here to choose someone that you're interested in and revise a little bit and bring up some of the information and just consolidate some of our knowledge that we have about this individual. Okay, so what I want to suggest here is pause, and I'd like you to spend a good 10 minutes on this task, okay? Really put some effort into it, really think about this, okay? Really go back and look through your notes and make sure you're getting as much about this person as you can. So, for example, you might know that Shakespeare was English, but you might not know the names of all of his plays, or you might not know which of his plays are most popular and which have lasted the longest. Okay, so really think about how much information you can get about whichever person you've chosen before moving on. So I am looking for 5 to 6 full sentences about your chosen person. Okay, so maybe pause here and go and complete that work for the next 10 minutes, and then when you're finished with that work, you can come back and continue on with this video. Okay, well, I hope you found that somewhat interesting and you were able to do a little bit of revision and find out a bit more, maybe doing a bit of research as well, and really just consolidating, bringing your knowledge together on this. What we really want to get down to today in terms of new information is looking at the significance of the Renaissance. Now, I know this looks like a lot of information on the screen. I will go through all of it bit by bit. And I remind you that the booklet, this is all in your booklet, so this is on page 9 and 10 of the Renaissance booklet under the heading Significance of the Renaissance. Okay, or sorry, page 10 and 11 rather of the booklet, page 10 and 11. So, different ways in which the Renaissance was significant. And I'll just go through them one at a time. So the first way I'll talk about is it's very important in terms of new ways of thinking. So we've talked about this. We talked about the scientific method coming around. We talked about people being more interested in nature. We talked about people just generally viewing the world and thinking about things in a slightly different way. So we said that during the medieval times, that whilst, yes, the world was still going and advances were definitely being made, people tend to look at the world through a superstitious eyes, and people would be very interested, when something happened, would quickly turn to seeing this as being either a result of something religious or something spiritual or something superstitious. Okay, so these are the Renaissance is, the medieval times is really a time where you see things like witches and fairies and different beliefs like that, and belief in the moon maybe having and the nature having different effects, and this kind of elements of still pagan beliefs and elements of beliefs from, before the age of logic really still being quite widespread. So people were very much viewing the world through these eyes of superstition, and it's perfectly understandable. You're looking at it through just the knowledge that they had, and they're using the stories that they know. In the Renaissance, people start to change the way they're thinking. Okay, so they come with new ways of thinking, and they start to question some of the things that maybe people believed in the past. And slowly but surely, the way of thinking in general turns around, and superstitious beliefs begin to be dropped. Okay, now it takes a long time for this, and it's one discovery after another that slowly makes these changes. But this really is one of the things that the Renaissance brings about, and they start focusing on logic, but they also focus on the way of the ancient Greeks and Romans, the way they thought. So it's definitely a new, more observant maybe way of thinking about the world. This is further developed, and I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but it is further developed later on in the 1700s during the Enlightenment, but that is a different story for a different day. Okay, so the Renaissance here very much changing away from superstition towards a more logic-based approach. The second most significant thing, or second thing we could say is significant about Renaissance, is possibly education. And this is really coming down to the printing press to a large extent. So remember when we talked about the printing press in Gutenberg, I talked about how significant an invention this was. What this allowed was for reading and writing to really spread across Europe, and again after Europe into the wider world. And it allowed the poorer groups of people to become educated. So before the Renaissance, education, and we talked about this a lot when we talked about early Christian Ireland, we talked about medieval world, we talked about how really the religious people and possibly the wealthy people, the very, very wealthy people who lived in castles, etc., were the people who were the best educated during the medieval times and before the Renaissance. Now, this is not to say that everyone's going to be able to read and write by the end of the Renaissance, but it's definitely improving things, okay? And literature and reading and writing and these skills become much more widely available to the common people. Culturally, we can't really underestimate how culturally significant the Renaissance is. The culture of Europe, when we think about the culture of Europe, we think about architecture, and we think about art, and we think about literature. Huge amounts of this come back to the Renaissance. Okay, when you've mentioned culture of Europe, people will very much think about the art in Italy and the architecture around Europe as well. And this culture a lot of it really stems from the Renaissance, and we still very much appreciate the art and literature and things that came out of the Renaissance. The next two things now, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on. It is worth mentioning at this point, but we will discuss both of these next two things in more detail at a later date. So the first one is the Reformation. And basically what the Reformation is looking at religion. Basically because people become more educated about the world and are able to read and write and able to find ideas by themselves, they start to question things that maybe the Catholic Church is saying to them. Okay, they start to read the Bible for themselves, and they start to see that really there's quite a lot of corruption in the Catholic Church at this time, and they start to call out the Church. And what happens here is that, and we're going to study this as a separate unit, but during the Reformation, a number of new churches are formed outside of the Catholic Church. Okay, so it leads to a number of different Christian churches across Europe. The Age of Exploration is again something that we're going to discuss as a separate unit, but this happens very much at the same time as the Renaissance, and they're very much linked together. It's the new way of thinking and a new interest in nature and the world that is one of the main causes of the Age of Exploration. And this new age, without the Renaissance and the new ways of thinking and a new curiosity about the world, we can question whether the Age of Exploration would have happened in the same way that it did. Finally, we have the advances in Western civilization. So many historians would disagree with the idea that nothing happened in medieval times, and they'd be right. It is referred to often as the Dark Ages, based on the fact that there's not really as much evidence of huge advancements happening, but there's definitely some stuff happening, and it's incorrect to claim that nothing is happening during the Dark Ages. But there's definitely a distinct change, and things are definitely moving much, much more rapidly when we get to the time of the Renaissance, and there's huge development, and there's huge movement in terms of the way people think, view the world and culture. And we can see how Western civilization, so Europe in particular, is really developing very, very rapidly towards a more modern, what we see in the modern world. We also see the discovery, obviously, of the US, and we see the colonization of a number of other nations around the world. And this these factors all lead to what basically becomes quite a supremacy of Europe around the globe for a few hundred years, where Europe has huge control and huge power. So I will invite you to maybe pause and kind of read through these individually by yourselves, and of course use the booklet. The last task for today, and so there's only two tasks for today, and the reason for that is I want you to spend a good bit of time on each of them. So the second task for today is, what I want you to do is rank these results of the Renaissance in order of what you believe to be the most important, and then explain why you've placed each point in its given rank. So essentially you have 6 different results from the Renaissance. I want you to choose, and you're going to say maybe, okay, education is the most important result of the Renaissance. Here's why I think that is. And the second most is the Age of Exploration, because they discovered this. Here's why I think that is. Now, I'm not looking for, huge amounts of paragraphs. I'm looking for 2 sentences on each of them. Okay, so you put it in its place. I placed this first because I think this, and this. I've placed this second because I think this, and this. And basically, I'm just getting you to consider the different results and maybe make your own judgments on it. There's no right or wrong answers here. It's just thinking about what each of these means, what each of these results means, how it's affected the world, and how you think it would have affected the world, and then thinking, is that really that important? Is this as important as something else? Okay, so again, you're going to pause here. This is pretty much the end of the video, actually. So you're going to complete this task as well, and both task 1 and task 2 are going to be uploaded onto Teams today. Okay, and if you have any questions, do let me know by email. Okay, but please spend a bit of time thinking about this and really putting your best effort into it. Okay, thank you.